hoping to do. So everyone, welcome. I know we have gotten a few hellos, and the chat box on the side, I think, is everyone hopefully is familiar with, because probably we are all living on Zoom meetings these days. So I just wanted to officially call the meeting to order, 6:01, since it dove into 6:02. And I know there's a ton of work that's been done. So I guess I can't see everyone on all my pages. So maybe just for the order of our ability to do introductions, could someone, whoever's in charge of the meeting, would you call off so that we can say hi? And please unmute yourself, say hi, make sure your name, and then we can go on to the next person so we have an appropriate list for attendance.
I can go through the attendance list if that's helpful.
Please, thank you so much.
Okay. Bridget Brooks.
Hi, Bridget Brooks, City Councilor, Tualatin.
Brittany Valley.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brittany Valley.
Chris Brune.
Hello, I'm here.
Mayor Frank Bubenik.
Present.
John Hannum.
Present.
Monique Bikeman.
Here.
Councilor Maria Reyes.
Present. Hi.
Council President Nancy Grimes.
Present. Hi, everybody.
Councilor Paul Morrison.
I'm here.
Rebecca Deal.
I'm here.
Okay. Monica Gibson.
I think I heard a present. Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep,
I can't look at the screen and read the list. Councilor Robert Kellogg.
Present.
Chair Cindy Hillier.
Present.
Veronica Williams.
I'm here.
And Councilor Valerie Pratt.
Present.
That's all I have on the official committee roster. I'll turn it over to Finance Director Dawn Hudson.
Well, let me share my screen and then I can turn it back over to the chair quickly, because that way I've got the agenda and so forth on there. Is everybody seeing a full screen of the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to try to get everybody. Okay.
So Nicole, I'm sorry to interrupt, Don. Nicole, what's best for your bookkeeping records? Should the others that are here, is there a sign-in process, or I should have asked this before, sorry.
I don't need to know which staff are present.
Okay. Are there any community members, or is that later?
I don't need their names unless they speak during
either. Okay.
comment.
Okay. Sorry. I just wanted to be sure that we were covering everything. Okay. Sorry, Don, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. So what you should see up on the screen right now is tonight's agenda. In the first two items, Madam Chair, I will leave to you, and then we will get into the budget part.
Okay. Thank you, Don. So Nicole and Don previously sent out the minutes from our first meeting together. And so I hope everyone's had a chance to review them. And so I guess what we're looking for, I'm sure you're all familiar with the process, if there are any additions or corrections to the minutes. And if not, we'll need a motion to approve the minutes as either submitted or amended, a second, and then we'll approve it. And as you're doing that, please say your name so Nicole can get that for the minutes.
Veronica Williams, hearing no corrections or additions, I move that we approve the minutes as submitted.
Paul Morrison, second.
Okay, it has been moved by Veronica and seconded by Paul that we accept the minutes as submitted. All in favor of this, I assume there's no discussion, so I'm moving straight to all in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you, motion carries. Okay, we'll move into public hearing, and I believe, Dawn, this is where you take things over, yes?
Yes, so thank you, Madam
Yes.
Chair. We are required under Oregon Revised Statutes 221.770 to hold 2 public hearings in order to receive a portion of the liquor tax state shared revenues. The first is this evening before the Budget Committee on the possible uses of the funds. And the next one will be in front of, come on, there we go, in front of the City Council on the proposed use of funds, and that'll be on the first meeting in June, which I believe is June 12th. We are estimated to receive $413,890 in fiscal year 2021. It is not restricted, and it is put into the budget for general city operations. The cigarette tax or marijuana tax shared revenues, the gas tax, and the other portion of the liquor taxes, which is a per capita amount, are not covered by this public hearing. Madam Chair, I'll answer any questions.
Are there any questions from anyone at this point about this? If so, please say your name, and I'm sure Dawn can help you.
Don, I have one quick question. This is Paul Morrison. To save me some time from looking it up, do you have off the top of your head what the number was from last year, compared to the 413,000 this year?
Yes, just give me 1 second.
300, it was 380,000. Wasn't it, that one? No?
Yeah,
In
$380,
the OLCC?
$40. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing no other questions, Dawn, I think we can move forward into our agenda.
Okay, I don't know if we have any public on here. Is there any public? If there are, we just need to find out if there's any comments for or against this. There's not a official action the Budget Committee needs to have, just we need to hold the hearing. But if there is any public on there that has any comments on it, on this matter, now would be the time. Okay.
Hearing none, we'll move forward. Thank you.
Great. Okay, the next part is the exciting part of and the meaty part of our meeting tonight is the continued review of the budget. The funds we're going to discuss this evening, actually, let me step back 1 quick second. The questions that I received, I will intersperse throughout the meeting. A lot of the questions I received from the committee are items that were already being covered in my presentation. I factored in a couple of those other ones that I've received that were not part, and I'll answer them during the appropriate part of the budget that I cover. A couple of the ones I wanted to kind of touch on first that aren't specific on that type of thing. One committee member wanted to know about our reserves and contingencies. So there were a couple of questions around reserves and contingencies. The contingency first, typically in our fund, is a 15% of expenditures. Though, like our development funds and some of the others, we set aside the whole amount. So whatever's left over in that fund to balance goes in a contingency. We won't have a reserve in that account. The others, it's hard to always track from one year to the next of what we started the year, what we thought we were going to end the year on the adopted budget side, and then what we start the year in the beginning fund balance in the current proposed budget. And there's a lot of different factors that go into that. When we put together the budget last year and we estimate what we're going to end the year with, it's as if we're going to spend 100% of what we budget and we're going to collect just 100% of the revenues. What typically happens in the year is we bring in additional revenues in a fund, and then we don't always spend 100% for numerous reasons across all funds. And so that then is estimating goes into what our beginning fund balance is in the current for the proposed budget. So it's a hard way to just track within the document. Unfortunately, the document we have, because it just shows the adopted column, and not what we're estimating when we put the budget together. So if there's the one person who asked more of a detailed, if you have more questions on that, you can either ask them here or get with me after this meeting sometime this week, and we can go into a little more detail. Another question that had come up was related to whether the city has considered putting aside a small percentage of our budget that goes towards art or public art, or art as part of other projects and so forth. And there has not been discussions at this point. I think the general topic has come up over the years in the past, but not to a lot of detail. But at this point, no, it is not something that has been discussed in depth at this point. There was a question as well. This was actually came from the mayor about when our water rates would start to see the impact from Portland Water Bureau having to build their water treatment plant. And the way our contract is written right now, we don't start seeing the impacts of capital projects until 2 years after they are completed. So we would not see an impact of that capital project until about 2028. I think those were the main questions that I had that were more general in scope. If there's anything on any of those, if there's any questions about that right now, I'll take those questions. Otherwise, I'll move into the rest of the presentation. Seeing or hearing none. Councilor Brooks, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the conversation around arts appropriations, and I just have been doing some research about different cities that do that, and I've been thinking about it because when we look at improvement projects that don't quite make it to budget, a lot of times what's cut is design and art. And so it's something that I'm thinking about, and I just wanted to bring it up, not for a change in this particular budget, but just for a start of a conversation of thinking about the arts a little bit differently, art and design, and how we could maybe strengthen our investment in art and design in our community. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments before I move on? Okay. Not seeing any. The funds we're going to discuss this evening are the building fund, the water operating fund, the sewer operating fund, the stormwater operating fund, the road operating fund, as well as the road utility fee fund, the park development fund, transportation projects fund, the Tualatin City Services Building Fund, our vehicle replacement fund that we started last year, our debt service funds, and you'll see I've got the pages and the revenues and expenditures. I'm going to go in order of the binder this evening, which is different than from past years. The only difference is, so I'll start in the building fund, and then I'm going to jump back to the general fund. So that'll be the only time we really have to switch backwards, is when we go back to the general fund. Because the general fund's our largest operating fund, I thought that would be, I'd save that for last. So then you'll see the different divisions or budgets within the general fund: council, administration, finance, municipal court, legal, information and maintenance services, our community development division, engineering, police, parks and recreation, parks maintenance, our library, and then the catch-all non-departmental, where something that doesn't fit into a particular division or stuff that is more generic across the organization or across the general fund gets budgeted in the non-departmental. So before I get into the building fund, I want to talk about some common themes that you'll see throughout the document, throughout the budget, that I won't point out individually as I go through, but you'll see that will happen in many places. The first is our personal services expenditures. So our full and part-time salaries, we use our budget software system has a salaries module. I take every individual employee, their benefit package, their number of hours, and I budget off of that. So it's very specific to every employee when I budget that. So any changes in our full-time personnel, someone leaves and we hire someone else, or any other changes, as well as our part-time, those get adjusted. So some budgets you'll see some go up, some go down, and that's usually the movement related to those salary lines. Health and dental insurance premiums, those are typically, those are going up. You'll see some increases in those line items for the individual premiums. But the other thing you'll notice, there are cases where they may go up larger than normal, they may go down, and that's based upon employees, current employees, if they change their level of insurance, if they go from single coverage to family or to employee plus spouse, that will change the premiums, as well as if we have someone leave and we replace them. What happens on occasion is we have someone who has full family coverage, they leave, we hire someone new, and maybe they have single party coverage. So you'll see those things. So you'll see a lot of ups and downs in those line items. PERS pretty much across the board in all budgets that you see, personal services, you'll see a decrease in PERS. I mentioned last time our participation in the employer incentive fund that dropped our contribution rate 2.09 percentage points. So that's factored in the lower rate. The adopted budget numbers, we did do a budget adjustment during the year for that payment, and we spread that the portion about a $1.6 million across all budgets that have personal services. We allocated that out, and we adjusted those pension line items up. So the adopted 1920 numbers include the portion of that payment that was made, as well as then that reduction, and then the proposed, of course, has the reduced rate. So you'll see the PERS costs in all budgets drop for that reason. Personal computer and laptop and information systems, our small tool lines in our public works budgets, and then our library equipment line item in the library budget. Those are all on replacement schedules, and so those amounts will go up and down each year depending on which tools or which pieces of equipment need to be replaced in any one year. So that goes up and down in those areas. Some may go up, some may go down. The transfers into the utility operating funds, I briefly went and mentioned this, I think last meeting, that if we have a project that is funded partially by SDCs, our system development charges that are in our development funds, and partial payments by our operating funds, then those projects completely get budgeted in the operating funds. And you'll see in some of the projects we're going to talk about tonight, in the water operating fund, 100% of that budget for the capital expenditures in the water operating fund, but there is a transfer in of a component of that project from the water development fund. So you'll see those transfers in a few of the utility operating funds, and it's for those capital projects that are in that budget that have a STC eligible component. You'll also see in the enterprise bond fund, you'll see some transfers in from different funds, and you'll see the transfers out in a few of the other, it's mostly our utility budgets, the building fund, those services that will be in the new Tualatin City Services building. The loan that we will be taking out here probably in the early July, there's a potential that we'll have a portion of the prepayment starting to happen before the end of the fiscal year, and that's factored in the transfers from those funds that are paying it, as well as the enterprise bond amount. I think that was a question of why the debt service amounts went up in the enterprise bond fund. It's based upon the beginnings of the repayment of that loan that we'll be taking out. And those are just estimates that are in the budget right now because we have not gone to the market. Interest earnings, I mentioned this in the budget message presentation as well, that you're seeing those drop. The rates are going down. We have not fully adjusted a lot of them all the funds as the rates have dropped significantly. Because the council doesn't adopt the revenue side, they only adopt appropriations, then the revenue amounts, the revenues are the side that balance to that, but if we've got a budgeted amount or what we've estimated in the revenue side, and I think it's going to come in lower, it's not as imperative for me to adjust those amounts because we're not held in the budget law to those amounts because it's not an appropriated amount. But so I haven't gone in and scrubbed every interest earnings line item for the impacts that have happened in the last couple months. And then utility rate revenues. I'll talk about the rates, here in a second, but across all the water, sewer, stormwater, and the road utility budgets, the impacts that you see in those revenue pages are based upon the rate revenues that are coming in. So the amount that we will be taking to the City Council in June for our utility rate, so I always take a resolution to Council in June, and the proposal that I will be bringing forth in June will be an increase of 4.25% increase to our water rates, and that is based upon our water master plan and the need to continue those increases for our infrastructure needs in the water fund and continuing to maintain our infrastructure. Sewer and stormwater, you see no increases at this time. A large portion of our sewer rates and a smaller portion on our stormwater side are actually set by Clean Water Services, and then there's also the local side that is set by the City Council. Clean Water Services is going forward their proposed budget with postponing their rate increases until likely July or January 1. They will revisit the economic picture in the fall and determine whether or not they're going to put forward a rate increase at that time or in January or some date forward. In discussions internally, we decided that it would be best to go ahead and follow that piece so that our sewer rates would just continue to track along with the clean water increases as well. So I will not be proposing, staff won't be proposing an increase in sewer and storm as of July 1st. On the road maintenance side, again, the need to maintain our roads and keep up that pavement maintenance program, that is an indexed rate. That is an automatic index in our ordinance. That is going up a 3.36% based upon the indexing that is in our ordinance. That's based upon the same indexing that the county uses for their transportation development tax. And the county board of commissioners did go forward with that increase this year as well. So we're proposing that increase as well. So you do see that a total impact on a typical residential utility bill would be $1.60 per month for the water and the road maintenance, the road utility fee increases. I thought I would talk before we get into the individual budgets as well as the capital outlay line items in the different budgets. I thought I'd go just talk capital up front as well. So in the general fund, the items that are interspersed in the different budgets for capital outlay, we have in the police department, we have budgeted to replace, I believe it's a total of 4 police vehicles, 3 of which are patrol vehicles. In the library, we have the last phase of replacement of the public furniture since that building opened, what has been 11 years now. Of course, we know you need to start replacing that furniture. The last couple of years, the library has been on a replacement of that furniture. And so we have, I believe it's the last phase in this proposed budget. The rest of these items are in the parks maintenance budget. And I'll talk a little bit more about them on the parks maintenance side, but we have a 60-inch riding mower budgeted. That's the one piece of equipment in that budget. They're proposing to do some sports court resurfacing at Tualatin Park. One question that had also come up about the deferred maintenance in the parks system, and I think we're staff is planning on coming back in June in a work session with council to talk about some of that deferred maintenance. But one of the items that we did hear pretty loud and clear during a lot of those discussions was the need to renovate some of the restrooms. And so the restrooms on the commons, as well as the restrooms in Community Park, are being funded for some renovations in this upcoming budget. At the Juergens Park playground surface, the replacing of that. We have some pedestrian bridge repairs out on the Keokuts Bridge, and a portion of those costs will come back to us. We are actually in a partnership on that, in the construction of that bridge. And so part of the inspection and the repairs that we have done on that will bill our partners. I think it was the City of Tigard, Clean Water Services. We're on that, and so a portion of that will come back to us on their share of those expenditures. And then we're going to start the planning and a redesign of the Stone Ridge Park and the play structures and some of the amenities out there. So we've got money in the upcoming budget to start that process. In the utility funds, on the road operating fund, we have some improvements out on Borland Road that are budgeted this year. The Herman Road widening, the Tualatin to Teton, we've got budgeted to do the design. And when we get to the road operating fund, we'll talk about the revenue side of some of the revenues that we're getting for that project. And then to do a transportation system plan update. There's some money in the budget this year to start that process. On the water operating fund side, we have the Blake Street, the 115th water line project. We're doing some system improvements to our SCADA system, which is our kind of our warning system on our water system, so that if there's any kind of issues going on, there's alarms in that, so our crews can get right on that. There's some water line relocations out on Tualatin Sherwood Road, and then some interior and exterior projects or repairs done on the B1 water reservoir. In the sewer operating fund, the 65th Avenue Nyberg sewer trunk line is budgeted this year as well. In the stormwater operating fund, we have some storm pipe replacement, Sweet Drive, Emery Zadell retention pond, and the Benicia water quality facility are capital projects that are budgeted in the upcoming year. So now let's go ahead and start with the building fund. So we'll start on pages 93 in your binder. So as I go through this, I will put up a slide that shows you the fund. So the bolded line is the fund that I'll be talking about. The pages are, so 93 to 97 is the complete set of pages for the building fund, including the description and goals and highlights page. Revenue page will start on 95, and then the expenditures follow from there. There was a question about the revenues. We've got some expenditure revenue increases, and whether those are still factored to increase under the pandemic situation. And what I will say is that we have not seen at this point a significant decrease in development around town, and projects are still coming in. So we are still anticipating that the revenues that are projected in here, we still feel comfortable with those amounts. On the expenditure side, the one item that I want to point out is the merchant discount fee line. You'll see that going down significantly. In this last year, we are experiencing a lot less payments on credit cards. So the merchant discount fee is the percentage that we pay for every credit card payment we take in. We did see some increase. If you were to see on the actual columns, that we saw some increased amounts go up. So we budgeted a higher number in 1920, and we're just not seeing that trend continuing in the current year. So we've dropped it down to what we think is a appropriate level for next year. Those are the two items that I was pointing out in the building fund. And if you have a question as we go along, wave or something, so I think I can see everybody on my laptop screen here. So if you have something that you want me to go over that I didn't touch on, please let me know.
Don, maybe it would be useful also if you have a question to drop it in the chat, and Nicole and I can keep track of those chat comments and highlight them for you.
Great. Thank you, Sherilyn. So moving on to the water operating fund. Excuse me, I have more things in front of me tonight than I typically do because I'm standing and running around. So on the, yes, okay. On the revenue side, you will see that there was a loan repayment for the Park Development Fund. So the other miscellaneous income that was $358,000 in the adopted 1920, and we're down to $2,200. The water fund had loaned the Park Development Fund for some property purchase. At the time that we had a piece of property that came available to us, the Park Development Fund, we were waiting for SDCs to come in. So the water fund loaned the Park Development Fund that money until such time as we started seeing the SDCs from the old RV Park of Portland property. That money is starting to come in. We have the SDCs available now. That loan was repaid in fiscal year 1920. So you'll see that has some impacts on some of the beginning balances as well. In the expenditure side, there were questions about the consultants line and the capital line. So the consultants line, there's a couple pieces that are the big components there. One is to do a water system operations and maintenance manual to take some of the pieces that we have currently, update that as well, but also beef it up more. And you'll see the Oregon Health Authority has a fact sheet and has some recommendations upon what should be in that kind of a manual. So we're planning to hire a consultant to help us with that project in the next year. We are also looking to purchase, and this is part of the capital line, a valve turning machine, of which there will be some engineering, the component to that, and some consultant dollars that will be needed to put that piece of equipment and that plan in place. I think those were the main questions we had on the water operating fund. On the sewer operating fund, the next set of pages. So the sewer and so the sewer fund. So two of the projects that are in the capital area, and these aren't necessarily the pictures of the sewer lateral repair that you see in the R&M systems. We need to do some lateral repairs across the city, and that is factored into that R&M systems line. I like this picture. It's from 2011. It shows a gas pipe that was bored through our sewer line. And we had no idea that when they ran the gas pipe, they didn't have any idea either. They had bored it through our sewer line. When we do the TVing of our pipes, this was noticed. And so thanks to Bert Olheiser and his crew for sharing this picture with me a few years back. And it's I don't know, I came across it the other day and thought it was kind of fun to show the kind of things that need to be repaired sometimes in our laterals. And then the 65th and Nyberg trunk line is a project that is being paid for by Clean Water Services. And so that's the other miscellaneous income in the sewer operating revenue budget, is that payment from Clean Water Services for that project. And we do have that budget in the expenditure side as well. In the capital line items that you also see as the reductions in some of the two capital items in the equipment and furnishings for both the sewer and the stormwater, is we replaced the Camel truck this last year. That was split between the two budgets. And so we had that budgeted in 1920, half in sewer, half in stormwater. So therefore, that's where you see the large reduction in that line item, because we don't have that big piece of equipment. It's about a $700,000 piece of equipment. In the vehicle replacement fund, and what you'll see in the vehicle expense lines in those funds, you'll notice the vehicle vehicle replacement expense lines in both those budgets went up. In the sewer side, went up from just over $65,000 to over $97,000. And the reasoning behind that is we are now starting to put money set aside into the vehicle replacement fund for when we have to replace this piece of equipment a number of years down the road. And so this is the first year, the 2021 budget is the first year that portion of that will be set aside. So you see that increase as well. A question came up about street sweeping and the bike lanes, and we do sweep some of our bike lanes, a couple of our areas out at 124th from Tualatin Sherwood Road to 99W and Tualatin Sherwood Road from Boones to Seiple twice a month. And the area around the railroad tracks is a weekly sweep. We do also respond when there are questions or complaints, when we get calls about areas that need to be swept because of something happened. Bert's crews then will get the street sweepers out there in a little quicker time frame as well. I did hear from our master bicyclist, Jeff Fox, who talks about when he rides his bike in, he can always tell when he's in Tualatin because our bike lanes are a lot cleaner than everywhere else he rides. But we do a lot of our bike lanes on a more frequent basis, and we do respond as needed when other areas come up.
Excuse me, Don, that was my question, and I really want to speak to 115th because we put in that beautiful bike lane and we did it towards it, last year, and it was really impassable for most of the fall and through the winter because there's lovely huge trees along there, including oak trees, and the debris and all the pine cones, etc., are really dangerous. It's even dangerous walking on the sidewalk there because of all those, you really have to watch where you're walking. So it would be helpful as we're putting in things that I'm concerned about the garden curve area too, because it has a lot of huge, gorgeous trees. And so I think there's just some new areas, and it's a little frustrating if people have to call all the time rather than that those areas get put on a more routine schedule.
Okay, and I did pass on your comments to Bert Olheiser, who oversees that service, and then Jeff Fox, our public works director as well. So they saw your comments, and they're on the line tonight too, so heard your comments, and they'll take that into consideration. So onward now to the road operating fund. On the road operating revenue, the other miscellaneous income of almost $1.2 million in the current year, you'll see it was made up of two different grants on the Herman Road project, some CDBG grant money for the Sagert Street project. I think it was a sidewalk project. And then money we got in from Clackamas County to take over the improvements and take over Borland Road. The grant lines, those three top ones, probably should have been under the other grant revenue, which you see on the top of this slide. So the 625 is just carried over. That is the Herman Road project at the design that I talked about earlier. So the 625 in this year's revenue, the 2021 revenue, is properly categorized in the other grant revenue, and you'll see that the amounts portion of them were in the other miscellaneous income in the current budget. So that's why those are off in the history, so to speak, and then what we're budgeting this year. We did receive the money in from the county on the Borland Road improvement, and we did receive the Sagert Street CDBG money from the county. So it's really the only remaining really for this coming year would be the $625,000 for the Herman Road project. And this is part of the section that will be worked on. You see we have no bike lanes, no sidewalks. So this is the area that will be designed and the project in the future to expand this and put in those safe routes for bicyclists like Jeff in this picture as he's hiking to work there. It's another picture we like to use often, just to show Jeff we appreciate him biking to work frequently. Mayor, yes, your question on the sewer, I did have that, and my apologies for passing over this. In the sewer fund, there was a question on the increase in conferences and meetings. And that's twofold. One is so we have 2 management analysts too that are part of that budget, that the cost of some of the conferences they were going to be attending this year, the cost for those were increasing. Now, of course, with trainings and conferences, the unknown whether those will be spent or not, but that's the reason for that budget. And there were some other opportunities for the sewer crews that we had not had in the past that were being budgeted going forward. So I think that covered all the sewer questions. Thank you for pointing that out, that I had missed that. On the road utility fee side, my computer's going slow. Okay, come on. Okay, there we go. My computer froze for a second. Sorry about that. So our 2020 pavement maintenance program. This is the big expenditure, obviously, in the road utility fee fund. And these are the areas that are proposed or part of the program that to happen. In the blue, a couple of the lines there are the overlay projects. The yellow is the areas that will be are programmed in to be slurry sealed this year. The red sections on the map are the crack seal, and then the orange sections on the map are the seal coating. Those of you here were last year, I gave you a seal quiz. I did not put together a seal quiz. You guys did so well last year. There was no need to test you on your seal knowledge this year.
Dang
it. I know you studied, didn't you, Brittany?
You know it.
There was a question, I don't know why, on the core area parking fund that we had gone over last meeting. That is, the revenues there are on page 119. The question was whether there'd be an effect on the fees from non-use due to COVID-19. The fees, the revenue in that fund is based upon a tax on the businesses in the core area parking district. I did reduce the revenues in your proposed budget for the anticipation that some of those businesses may not be reopening at this time, or when the pandemic is over, or when we start reopening. So I did back down that revenue number. So there is a COVID-19 impact reduction in that budget already. Moving on to the Park Development Fund, pages, so we'll start on page 134 for the revenue. Skipping over all the development funds that I went over last meeting. So the one big change here, and this is where one of those beginning fund balance items comes in, is where we projected, or the adopted 1920 budget had a beginning fund balance of $319,500. But the proposed 2021 is over $2 million. And that's because of the revenue we received from in this current fiscal year on the Commons on the Tualatin project. So that money was received. It has not been programmed into being, it was not expended in this current fiscal year. So it'll start out as beginning cash balance in 2021. So that's the reason for that big increase. The Parks SDC line in this on page 134 as well. Obviously, we had an adopted amount of about $1.7 million that was in anticipation of this project. The $804,000 is we don't have quite this large of a project out there. So it's a placeholder of Parks STCs that we anticipate will come in, the projects that we think will happen and come in the door this next fiscal year. On the capital side, the big pieces here are the capital items in this fund. So the two big ones are the Commons fountain renovation, and there's money programmed in the budget. Part of that is paid for by a grant from the state. And that was a question that came up about the source of the other revenue on the revenue side. And I believe the question was that is the other state or the other grant revenue. And that is a state grant that we received for a portion of this project. So that the Commons fountain renovation project is budgeted in this fiscal year, as well as the connection of the remaining connection there behind that Commons on the Tualatin apartment complex. On the backside, we're finally going to get, as part of that project, the extension of the Tualatin River Greenway Trail. The developer will build it, and we will reimburse them that portion out of the STC funds. So we're finally going to get that project completed. And that is factored into the capital items as well. Anything else? Any other questions on park development?
Don, I have one quick question.
Okay.
So on the park development fund for your SDCs for the development over what is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is the old Portland RV park, that, to my knowledge, has been in your budget every year now for what, 3 or 4 years? What's the certainty of it actually happening this in this fiscal year? Because I know it's, and I'm not blaming you, I'm just saying we've been waiting a long, long time. There's been a lot of delays. Do you have some inside knowledge that you can pass on?
The revenues have started coming in, and we are anticipating they will pull the rest of their permits before June 30th. So the project has been gone through the planning process. It's already, that whole part, it's already in building, and the permits are starting to be pulled.
Then I second Monique Beichmann's yay.
Yes, we're excited. I agree with you. It has been a number of years. We've been keep hearing that the application was going to come in the door, and it kept getting delayed and delayed. But yes, the application's come in, it's been approved, and it is going through the building permit process. And we are seeing that revenue coming in finally. On the Transportation Projects Fund, I mentioned these in the budget message. These are the projects that are budgeted for the upcoming year to be completed. And we sold the bonds. We have that money on the revenue side, and so the beginning balances, and that will go up and down depending on how much of projects that we have budgeted in any one year get completed, and if there's any we need to carry forward. So that's why you'll see some ups and downs on the beginning fund balance lines. But these are the projects that are budgeted for the upcoming year to either be completed or to have the project started. The Tualatin City Services Building Fund, I talked about this the other day or last week as well. The city services building that you are seeing, if you go by there on Herman Road, you'll see the construction happening. And then also in the capital piece is some renovation that has been, we have kind of a placeholder for that amount of money as well, or money in there for some changes we may need to make to the city offices building when we move staff around. Those projects are being funded. The other half of the Tualatin City Services Center is being funded by that loan. And then I am looking at what other amounts for these other projects, of whether it's best to fund those with one-time monies or to fund them as part of a loan as well. So that'll be analyzed when we go through that process in June and July. The vehicle replacement fund, I talked about this a little bit with the Camel, and we talked about the Camel purchase. so the utility funds are still participating in the vehicle replacement fund that we set up last year. So you'll see those contributions in the utility funds and the transfers into this fund. My hope this year was to do the general fund vehicles, to start that process in this fund. And then this little thing called COVID-19 impact hit us, and I just wasn't comfortable taking aside some of those one-time dollars into this until I knew what those impacts of the pandemic were going to be. So we put that off at this point and not funded the general fund vehicles into that fund yet. As far as the debt service funds, this is our general obligation bonds, which is paying off the transportation bond, and we had refunded, refinanced, so to speak, the library and the parks bonds that were outstanding. So that's just now one bond. That's in their general obligation bond fund, and we do a property tax levy to pay that debt service. And the enterprise bond fund, we have some outstanding water revenue bonds, or some water bonds that had been sold a number of years back. We refunded them a couple years ago. We got some big savings on that debt service. We have then the operations, or the warehouse facility out on the warehouse or the operations site. The debt service for that loan is in that fund as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the projected repayment as we start the repayment process on the $4 million loan for the Tualatin City Services Center building. I am going to look at the warehouse bond that still is outstanding, or the loan that's outstanding on that, and determine whether it's in our best interest to refinance that loan as well as part of this new loan process. So that's something that I have the consultants I'm working with on that. I've talked with them about. We're going to analyze it at that point. Before I get into the general fund, I had a couple questions on the Tualatin Development Commission budget. First, in the Tualatin Development Commission admin budget, which is on page 157, where the budget numbers starting on 158. On page 159 there, the consultant line went from 20,000 to 40,000. I had a question of what constituted that line item. We are having a study and analysis done for potential for future urban renewal districts, and that amount is the consultant contract for that for that project. On the Leviton Projects District on page 162, what the capital amount is set aside for. It's a placeholder for right-of-way projects that we're starting to identify, and we'll be working with the commission and the commissioners to identify some right-of-way projects that would fit into the Leviton district and be utilized, some capital dollars. So it's a placeholder for those discussions to happen this year. At that is, are there any questions on any of those funds that I went over? Okay, seeing none, then let's jump backwards in our binders to the beginning of our revenue and expenditure section. So pages 51. So the general fund is 51 to 92. I'll start with the revenue pages on 51 to 53, and then the expenditure sections will start on 54 and cover the rest of the revenue and expenditure section for the general fund. So starting on the general fund revenue page. So first, let me talk about the COVID-19 impacted revenues, because I had a number of questions about these types of items and some of the other pieces. So let me talk about the line items that I have adjusted. And if you recall from our meeting last week, I took the tact of what if things were pretty much shut down for the first 3 months of the fiscal year through September 30th. And I made some projections and some estimates based upon that factor. Our franchise fees I'm projecting to go down based upon the fact that a lot of our businesses are closed right now, and it's the calendar year of 2020 that we get our franchise fees next year based upon. So while I think residential usage will go up, Industrial and commercial, I'm anticipating will go down. How much that'll offset, I'm not positive, but I've factored in a reduction in that revenue line. I factored in a reduction in our business license fees, again, based upon the assumption that there will be businesses in town that will not reopen and will not be taking out a business license. The motel and hotel or motel taxes line, which is our transient lodging tax. I had a couple questions about that. I did cut that in half. I think that may be conservative, but I don't know how quickly people will start traveling, even after things start to reopen. So I am taking a very conservative approach with that, and I did reduce those in half. It is the local TLT rate as well as the countywide one that we get a portion of. The passport fees I also did cut in half as well, and two reasons of that. Again, travel related, how many people will come in, and I don't know when we will open that we'll open up passport executions again. We will at some point. I think that we need to get our core services going first and things that we do in our buildings before I would open up passport processing again. So I went again a little conservative on that. Fingerprint fees, of course, right now, that's not happening at all because our police department is closed, or at least the building is closed for the public. So I've reduced that based upon whether those services don't start up again until October 1st timeframe. The GREAT program has been canceled for this year, and so I had reduced that line item for that factor, knowing that was one of the items I did know going into it enough that I felt comfortable reducing that line item. Fines and forfeitures, this is our library fines as well as our municipal court fines. Again, citation numbers have been down. Our library fines are down because the building's closed, and then depending on when we start up that process again. So I have reduced those line items in that category as well. What I did not and have not yet adjusted is because we are still looking at these impacts. The parks and recreation programs and events, a number of those we have made that decision as we sit here today to cancel, but there are some things that we are still looking at. I know Julie and Ross and the rest of the staff over there are looking at their programs and what those impacts, not only on the revenues, but on the expenditures, because if we're not doing some of those events, there's expenditures that we will not incur. But some of these programs and events cross over fiscal years, where part of what's in the next fiscal year is actually next May and June expenditures or revenues that may come in. So we're still doing that analysis. So nothing has been adjusted in this budget for that. I'm comfortable with that at this point, in the fact that those amounts, revenues or expenditures, are not going to increase under this scenario. It would just be any kind of a decrease. And so if you are comfortable with approving a budget at this point, nothing's going to be going up. So we wouldn't be coming back to council with an increases related to that. Things just may be reduced at that level. So that's an item that is not factored in yet. But I do know that some of those, there are impacts that are out there. We just have not programmed in the budget because we need to continue those discussions and analysis.
Director Hudson, Counselor Brooks has a question about if you could remind her what the GREAT program is.
Is Chief Steele on the line? Chief, I'm going to turn that over to Chief because he can answer it 10 times better than I could.
Good evening, everyone. It is the Gang Resistance Education and Training. It's our summer youth camp programs for kids at Hazelbrook.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
So I had a few other questions on the revenues. Obviously, you can see that there was probably a lot of them, and a lot of questions I had were based upon the COVID-19 impacts. A couple of the others I had, Why are alarm fee revenues expected to increase? A large part of that is if during this year, this current fiscal year, the person that is now overseeing that program has taken a different tact on it and been able to collect on a number of the permits that were not collected on or people had not taken out. So our revenues in the current fiscal year have gone up significantly, even over the budgeted amount in the current fiscal year. I did back off what our original assessment and estimate was going to be on alarm permits, based again on the COVID-19 impacts of businesses that may not reopen and may not take out an alarm permit. But the reason you see an increase over the adopted 1920 budget is based upon the revenues that were actually coming in this year in going through that program a little more fine-tuned and getting some permits that needed to be taken out and paid for. In the liquor and so the OLCC revenue, the state shared revenue lines, the OLCC, the two amounts, we have a per capita amount and the formula shared revenue. The formula shared revenue was the piece that was on our public hearing this evening. We also get a portion of our liquor taxes that are on a per capita basis. The question was whether or not our marijuana taxes were in there as well. And no, we have the marijuana tax line item, and then the two OLCC lines are the revenues from the liquor tax. I had a question on the marijuana tax of whether it's going up, but whether that's a projection of any city dispensaries. And the answer is no, that line item is purely the state shared revenue portion that we get. Other question. The public works permit fees, there was a significant increase. Again, I mentioned that development, we are still seeing development out there, and the engineering department is estimating that those projects that need to pay, and even public projects that have a public works component that need to take out a public works permit will actually increase. And so that's an estimate from the engineering department. And we checked with them before we finalized the budget, and that was a comfort level as well there. The other grant revenue, there was a $9,000 increase, and the question was what that source and reason was. There are actually 3 police grants that we are receiving, that started receiving this year and we're projecting into next year. It's a speed enforcement grant, a distracted driving grant, and an alcohol decoy grant. And those are reimbursements for some overtime that our officers do to do those enforcement activities. There was a question on what street tree fees are. So we have the street trees that are in the right-of-way out on, Tom Steiger, if I speak on any of this, or Ross, either one of you can correct me if I say any of this wrong. But the trees that are in the right-of-way that are the property owner's responsibility, when they replace those, they can pay for the tree to be replaced. So they pay that street tree fee, and then our staff will buy the tree and go out and install it. But it's the opportunity for the homeowner to pay the fee through us, and then we put the tree in. Did I miss anything, either of you gentlemen?
That's a good summary, Don.
I can be taught. Somewhat. Another question on the increase in the other space rental. On the so in that the line item in the other space rental is for our cell tower lease out on our, I believe it's our operations site. We are in the process of renegotiation of that lease, and hopefully that'll be going to council here soon. In that lease is a one-time $20,000 payment. I don't want to really call it a signing bonus, but it is a one-time $20,000 payment. And so that's factored into that $50,000. The remaining $30,000 of that line item is the monthly lease payments that they pay for the putting the cell tower on our property. And I know I had another couple questions come in late. There we go. And I tried to remember where I put it. The question on the percentage of the cigarette tax and the liquor tax monies of whether they're cities or state, or if it's a full pass through from the state. Both those line items, or all three of those line items, are state taxes that are paid through the state, and then we get our allocations for those. On the ball fields, there was a hike in this year with the anticipation potentially of a fee increase that got pushed off, and that's another one of those line items that we have not adjusted based upon the impacts of field use and so forth, that I know we'll work with the Parks and Rec Department to kind of shore up those revenue line items. I think that was all that I have on the general fund revenues. If any of your questions didn't get answered, please let me know, but I think I caught all the ones I received in the last couple of days. So let's move on to the city council budgets, and now we'll start going through the expenditure budgets and all the different line categories here, or the different programs. On page 55, the city council budget, there was a question on the community engagement and why that was going down. It's not that we're doing less community engagement. In the 1920 budget, we have the community survey budgeted that we are in the process of doing. We think that the majority of the expenditures will happen before June 30th. There is a little piece that is budgeted in 2021, but the big reduction there is the cost of the community survey that is only happening in this fiscal year. On the administration side, a couple things that are happening here, mostly related to volunteer services. Team Tualatin used to be budgeted in our, what we call the Public Works admin budget. We got rid of that budget this year. So what you saw probably in a couple different budgets is we took the line items from that budget, including personnel, and allocated those out to the different budgets. The Team Tualatin side, we have the rec leader that's part of that, runs that program. That person is a part-time temporary salary that was moved into the administration budget here, since that's where volunteer services are budgeted. We also, Margaret Gunther, one of our volunteer coordinators, who has been budgeted in the library, but some of her expenditures were under volunteer services and admin, but her personnel services side was in the library. We've moved that also into the admin budget. So that's where you see the increase in the full-time dollars. And I came across this picture on our volunteer services page. I guess she has a new resident in her home. Penny is her dog's name there. And so I thought that would be a fun picture to show as Margaret joining at least her personnel services side in the administration budget. She is still housed in the library and doing all the wonderful library volunteer services. There were a couple other line items in here that, sorry, I have one piece of, I have too many things going where I would only have them right in front of me, but it's just staying in front of a computer camera is new for me. So I think those were the main items in the general fund administration budget. On the finance budget, on page 60, there was a question that came up about the consultants line. The process to put together your budget binders every year is a very labor-intensive process, and is in about 4 different places, 4 different programs and so forth that needs to happen to get that document put together. So we are going to be implementing some new software that's a budget to do the budget binder and a lot of the budget work, and on both the proposed budget, the adopted budget, as well as the budget worksheets in our meetings. So the increase in the consultants is the implementation cost in the upcoming year to implement that. And you should see a whole different, the look to the budget document won't look drastically different to you, but there'll be a lot of the behind the scenes and some of the things that you'll see in there as well. On the municipal court side, it's pretty much status quo. We are fully staffed in the personnel side. We have all 3 court clerk positions filled right now. We've had budgeted for 4, but we just had not had all 4 positions, court administrator plus 3 clerks budgeted. And then of course the materials and services are staying pretty stagnant, and court staffs continue to do a great job with what they have, and what's in there is what they need to run an efficient court. In the legal budget, someone was worried that maybe I cut Sean's salary or removed, maybe cut him down to half-time. That is not the case. The legal budget, the reduction you see in here is related to that PERS savings we had going forward. So Sean, I see you smiling there. You're happy to know that you are still being paid and we're not cutting your salary. Moving on to information systems.
Don,
Yes.
hang on just a second. So there's a question about, on page 58, speaking of legal, the question is why decrease in legal line on page 58 admin expenditures?
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. It was something I was missing. So in the 1920 budget, we had money set aside for the outside counsel we use for the negotiations with AFSCME, our general services bargaining unit. And so there's legal money set aside in there for the negotiations this year. We are carrying some over because of, obviously there's a lot of unknowns right now with the pandemic. And so we've got some money in that 21,000, but the big part of it is a larger portion that was set aside this year for those negotiation outside counsel. On the information services side, like the big items here, and I had a couple questions on the R&M computers line item, but then you also see a large reduction in the computer equipment and software line item. And so those go hand in hand. What we are doing is we are moving off of a Microsoft Exchange server for our email backups and retention and so forth. And it's coming off of our Exchange server, and we're going to Office 365 out in the cloud. The computer equipment and software line in the current year included that implementation to go to that. That will happen in this fiscal year. And then in the R&M computers, then the majority or the half of that increase is based upon then the annual amount we'll pay for the cloud versions of Office 365. The other 30,000 in that line item are the natural increases in a lot of the maintenance contracts we have in our software across the city is the main part of that, just the growth in that and some other pieces that we've been slowly moving into this budget and taking out of other budgets. So that's the other $30,000 increase in that budget.
Dawn, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
There was a question from Councillor Pratt. One of the administration goals on page 57 is to determine the scope of a climate action plan. Are there any funds allocated in the 2021 budget for this? Do you want to answer that? Let me take that. Go ahead.
My apologies, Councillor. I had that at the bottom of one of your questions you asked, and I just didn't have it in front of me. There are not pieces programmed in right now. That is something that we will be taking a scope of work to the council later in the fiscal year. And then at that point, once we determine the scope, well, then we'll be able to go to contingency and move in dollars that the council wants to allocate at that point. So we determined that we hadn't had that scoping discussion. We wanted to have really that discussion to determine what was the proper amount to put in the budget. Okay, so that is the information services budget. So on the maintenance services side, and this is when I sent out the email the other day, and so I did have a lot of questions about this. I realized as I was going through the binder over the weekend that you had the maintenance services budget, not the fleet budget. And what we did this year is we determined that we didn't really need the two separate divisions. And then we also had staff that was in that public works admin budget that we got rid of. Part of the reason we had them in that public works admin before was we didn't really know where to put them. And it was a carryover from the old days when we had an operations fund and some other changes we've made over the years. This year we made this determination that we would create one maintenance services division. And it was combining fleet maintenance and building maintenance. We combined those budgets, called it maintenance services. So we were able to move some staff as well. So the management analyst as part of this department that was covered under public works admin, as well as the warehouse staff person. She was also funded in that public works admin. So we've moved them into maintenance services, this new division. To track your history, since we combined it, I should have provided in this budget, in the binder, the detail of the fleet maintenance budget so that you could see some of those line items. One question came of, did we have an apparent new $130,000 fuel cost? No, that was $130,000 was fuel we've had in past years. It was just part of that fleet maintenance budget. And we created now the line item in maintenance services. So because we took building maintenance, renamed that one maintenance services and added these other things into it, made it real confusing. And my apologies for that. When I sent out the email, I think on Monday, I attached, hoping that would make some more sense, but it was something that I probably should have done a much better job of explaining. So I think there were a couple other questions in that budget, but the fuel, some line items that were new or that were new in that had nothing in the current year. Wasn't because there wasn't anything, it was just in that fleet services budget. The safety and risk management, $14,000 was being done before. Again, that was part of that public works administration budget. That is some money that we set aside for the CERT program and some other emergency management. So that's now in this budget, came out of that public works admin. And then the R&M maintenance on the vehicles, again, that was part of the fleet maintenance division. It's just now in this budget. The big change that you will see, if you were to compare those two, the big change is in the personnel dollars. And that's to say, because we do have those two positions that were not part of fleet maintenance or part of building maintenance, or part of that public works admin budget, are now fully 100% in the maintenance services budget. So that is a big increase if you were to compare the two budgets year to year. Another part, speaking of the public works admin budget, the other parts, there were a couple other positions that were funded in there. Was the public works director and the office coordinator in the public works department. Those have now been allocated out into the different utility funds and the engineering in the general fund. So their salaries and benefits are spread out across, I think it's 4 different budgets. And some of those other costs are spread out in other budgets.
But Don, correct me if I'm wrong. There's no change in terms of increase of staffing or increase of costs. It's just a shifting and a consolidation.
Correct. Yes. Just where it's being funded, but no changes in staffing at all. In fact, across all budgets, if you were to go in the back in the appendix and look at the adopted positions chart, there are just some shifts of where people are budgeted, but there are no changes in FTEs in any of the budget or total FTE. And that was a question we'll be getting to in a minute on the police department. There was a question of whether there's any new officers in the budget, and the answer there is no. We have not added any personnel in the police department or any personnel across the city. In community development, I had a few different questions on this, in this budget, and a couple things I'll go over first, and then I'll make sure that I answer the other questions. In the consultant side, we are seeing a decrease in that line item. Majority of that is related to the Tualatin 2040 project that we're taking. The major part of that would happen in the current fiscal year, and that was budgeted in the 1920 budget. So that those expenditures are not in the 2021 budget. Some few of the line items in here are related to the tourism program. Questions I had related to that are on the economic development expense. You'll see there's a $20,000, what I'll call it right now is a placeholder, and that is set aside some money that is being called right now tourism recovery, and utilizing some expenditures to help tourism recover after the pandemic. We don't know exactly what that'll look like yet. As this goes along, and then we see what areas, would it be something like that we hold an event that we might bring people in to help put heads in beds and help some of the other areas that are related to tourism. We haven't identified exactly what that is, but we want to set aside a pot of money and identified for tourism recovery. In the advertising informational line, the $10,000 you see there is for tourism marketing. Again, as we see what our needs are, where that money will best be spent to help recover the tourism industry in Tualatin, we're setting aside some of the TLT money to do that as well. Other questions I had, that covered a number of them. With community events being canceled, the $10,000 increase in the advertising realistic, again, that's for tourism marketing when we get to that point. And then in the community engagement effort, we have some money, a small amount of money there, $800. That is for when we do some outreach events for things like Tualatin 2040 and some other things in the future, having some outreach, some money to have some outreach items, whether it's giveaways or anything like that. We've set aside some money, a small amount of money for those types of events. Now, granted, if those don't happen this year, that won't be spent, but that's what that line item has been set up for. The engineering side, I really don't have anything here to point out. So if there's nothing, their material and services are staying pretty much right on what they did this year. And then the personal services, again, the decrease there is the PERS impact. I really like the idea that I can say PERS impact and have it be a decrease than saying PERS impact and it's a 20% increase. So thank you again, Council, for supporting participation in that program. It gives me at least 1 year to stand up here and talk about some positive PERS news. On the police department side, again, there's not a lot to talk about. It's a pretty status quo budget, continuing to do wonderful things in the police department. And then the contract services line item, I mentioned that during the budget message, that we're actually seeing a reduction in our dispatch services contract with WACA. So we're excited that that's a decrease that is being carried forward. And that is a part of that $6,000 decrease in the overall materials and services in the police department. In Parks and Recreation, a couple different things going on here. First, the consultants line, you'll see that that's a pretty large reduction. You recall last year we had set aside some money for some events-based planning, and that we were looking at potentially the site out at Brownsbury Park and doing something with this old barn. Unfortunately, a number of reasons and the structure and so forth related to that facility, that was not something that we could look at. And so we did not move forward with that events planning space. And so that's not in this current year budget. And that's the reduction in the consultant line item. The other pieces, as I mentioned before, the events, and the impacts of events that are either being canceled, or we're looking at whether what we're going to be doing with those are not factored in, or not, there are no expenditures reduced in this budget at this point. Again, some of those items will need to be carried into for next fiscal year towards the spring, and when we have to start putting down deposits and so forth for next year's events. So there will be monies there. So again, Ross, Julie, and their staff and I will go through and determine what impacts need to happen in these budgets. Question came up about the Parks and Rec, the maintenance and the deferred maintenance side, and the discussions. Having on that, again, council will have a work session item in here in the very near future about some of that deferred maintenance, and we did factor in, again, the restroom repair or renovations that we heard need to happen, and more discussions, but nothing else has been factored in. The big picture that has not been factored in this budget until those discussions happen. Parks maintenance, they get to do all the fun stuff besides just keep the parks looking as great as they do. And I know Tom and his staff are doing a great job even during this time out there keeping the parks in such great shape. So thank you, Tom, and make sure you let your staff know what a great job we think they're doing and keeping those parks maintained, especially given the circumstances that we're living in right now. The big items here that I wanted to point out were those capital items that we talked about. And I mentioned those before. The playground structure there in the upper corner, the Stone Ridge Park there in the middle, the Keokuts Bridge, we're doing some repairs out there on that bridge and keeping that going strong. And then I couldn't find a picture of the bathrooms, and I didn't want to show you because I don't have a picture of what the inside that needs to renovate them. But you can see, at least in the background of the fountain here, that those are the bathrooms, that part of the bathrooms that will be renovated in this upcoming budget with those monies. And we also have some sidewalk work around the Commons Lake that is part of this budget to help with that maintenance of some areas around there that need to be maintained and fixed this year. That is part of the upcoming budget. Oh, there we go. In the library, and I had a couple questions there, and I think I'll answer all those questions as I go through this as well. The consultants line, you will see a decrease in that line, and that was in the current year we had the design work done on the makerspace area that we're hoping to have built in the library. You see it's laid out there, kind of where the DVD collection is right now. And that has been designed, and so we're working through what that might look like and future funding for that. But that's the reduction in the consultant line that you see. And then the equipment rental, it is time to replace our self-check machines. The technology is getting old, the software is getting old, and it is time to replace those machines. They are very popular. I was telling Jerry Ann, I think in our budget meeting, that it's like every time I walk through the library, there seems to be a parent with his or her, 2 kids or that, and they've got a stack of books that they're checking out, and the kid is just excited as all get out to be able to run the books across the self-check machine. And it's if you haven't just stood and watched that, I recommend you doing it. It's a lot of fun to watch. But we are looking, and Jerry Ann did a great job of looking into the replacements, and we are looking to lease. We've determined that it's going to be better off for us to lease those machines instead of just buy them up front outright. The different maintenance on them, and when the technology gets old, the benefits of the lease agreements we'll have. And so that's the line. The equipment rental line is the first year lease payment to replace those self-check machines. There was a question on what costs are we anticipating post-COVID-19 for addressing disinfection of items and new procedures. I checked with our building maintenance or our maintenance services. They're good. Our maintenance services supervisor today on that question. We already do during normal operations 7-day cleaning with our custodial contract, 7-day cleaning at the library. So that will continue. So we will obviously have 7-day cleaning. There will be supplies, cleaning supplies in the library for things to be cleaned during the day as necessary. And that's things that are already happening and that has been purchased during this COVID-19 pandemic in all our facilities, having more disinfectants and wipes and so forth. And so that will be in place as well. And all those supplies get furnished and purchased out of the maintenance services budget and then put into the different facilities. And so that is already factored in. Of course, as we do go through our reopening phases and the work that we're doing to prepare for any of that, that is a piece that we are looking at as well. And if we identify something that is not part of the normal process right now, we'll factor that in and take that in consideration and put that in place before we open the doors. So on the non-departmental side, so a couple of the items here, the Chamber of Commerce line, what that line item is part of the transient lodging tax. The agreement we have with the Chamber is that we will give them a percentage of the tourism related revenue of the city tax. I reduced that in half as well, because of course it's based upon collections. And since I factored in a half reduction on the revenue side, whatever we're not collecting, of course, then does not get passed on to the Chamber. So I've reduced that line in half as well for that same reason of not anticipating that the TLT tax will increase in the very short term. There is a line item under the advertising city newsletter, $2,500 there, our Tualatin Today newsletter, which is an online or an electronic newsletter. We are looking at doing a one-time print, one time a year print version. And so there's money set aside to do that. And that's the $2,500 in the advertising city newsletter line. In the volunteer programs line there on page 91 as well, again, since we moved Team Tualatin into the, out of that public works admin budget, some of the expenditures related to that program that go into the volunteer services line, the volunteer programs line in the general fund non-departmental. That's the increase in that line item, is the Team Tualatin related expenditures. On the reserve side, so you'll see the general account reserve went up. There's actually a reduction in the reserve and an increase in the reserve in this line item. When we made the employer incentive fund payment to PERS, we had a $400,000 PERS reserve that I've been carrying for a number of years. We utilized that reserve money to put into, or to pay, that was a part of that $2 million payment. We are building that reserve back up in the savings of the current year budget of that contribution rate decreasing. So we're building the rate up. It's not back up to 400,000. I believe it's $100 and something thousand in the 2021 budget. So that net, but the other side is I have set aside a $500,000, what I'm calling a COVID-19 reserve. It's that unknown impacts if we need to utilize some one-time money to get through, or if there's some unknown expenditure, big expenditure that comes up. As we're determining what these impacts are, I determined it was prudent to put aside some reserve money for potential impacts. So there's a $500,000 set aside in that reserve line for that. That is my presentation on the budget. If there's any questions, I can answer them now. If there's something I missed, Otherwise, we'll talk about some amendments that we have that we're going to be asking for as well. Seeing none. So every year, as we put together the budget in February and March and so forth, we do our best guess of what's going to be spent, where we're going to be at with projects and so forth. I do ask then my departments to let me know if there's any changes in those estimates of significance, because this is the first opportunity that we could do of carryover amounts of things that won't be spent this year that we thought were, that we need to then put into next year's budget. So I have 4 different items that need to be carried over that will not be expended this year. In the community development side, there was an interface between their online service, or their permitting software, Track It, and then into our Laserfiche, which is our records management system. There was an interface that's being built for those documents, things that are in Track It, to go all automatically into our records management system. They're not going to get us that project completed by June 30th. So $1,900 is the amount of the project that will need to be carried into next fiscal year. So we'll increase our beginning fund balance in the general fund, and then increase the community equipment and software line item in community development for that amount. In the Ready to Read grant, that will not be spent fully this year, and I'm going to actually have one amendment to my amendment here, and that's I'm going to round that number up to $4,525. And I could probably see a lot of the staff laughing because I require everything to be in 0s and 5s. It's something that I'm a control freak about, and I can't believe that I actually put something forward that is not a 5 and a 0. So my recommendation and my amendment will actually be $4,525. Again, that's a Ready to Read grant that goes into some of our programming, and that won't be spent and received this fiscal year. I mentioned the public furniture, the last phase of that furniture replacement. A portion of the furniture that's in this year's budget has been ordered or will be being ordered, but it will not arrive by June 30th. We will not complete that current year phase by June 30th. So the library is asking for $12,820 of that project to be carried over into next year. And again, that'll increase beginning fund balance and increase their office equipment and furniture line. Back on the Ready to Read grant, we'll increase the grant revenue side, and then the library programs line item in the $4,525. The Blake to 115th Street water line project. Again, our estimate, we didn't get as far along as we thought in the estimates of that coming in, or coming in a little bit higher. So we need to carry over $100,000 of that for that project into fiscal year 2021. Now, the reason we have many line items here is this is one of those projects that has a component that is SDC eligible coming out of the Water Development Fund. So a third of that 100,000 is coming from the Development Fund. So I'll increase the beginning fund balance in that fund and increase our transfer out to the Water Operating Fund for the 33,000. And the Water Operating Fund impacts are increasing beginning fund balance of 67,000, because the other 33,000 is increasing in the transfer in, with the whole project line item increasing $100,000. So those are the amendments that I am asking for this evening as part of your deliberations for consideration of approving the 2021 budget. At that, the screen or the line item, or the thing I didn't include in here is public comment. This would be the time to take public comment if there is any. And if there, after that point, I would be delighted if you would consider making motions this evening to approve the budget. And after the public comment, I do have the motions here that would need to be put forward if there are any. So Madam Chair, I send it back to you.
Sorry, I was reading the comments. There was one last comment or question. There's nobody at the poll center. Is that something you wanted to address, Don?
That's just for public comment, that there's nobody to speak from the poll center.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm like, I don't know what happened to Bates. He was there.
No, sorry. I just was trying to clear it off my screen and didn't expect it to be there. Sorry about
Okay.
that.
No, thank you.
So, please, public comment.
I have a question.
Okay.
When we talked about the environmental consultant and that we didn't have scope yet, I was curious why there wouldn't be sort of a placeholder, or how do we adjust for that when the conversation happens later on this summer?
Okay. Usually, so we have contingency money set aside in the general fund. And so part of the discussion that will happen when we have that discussion at council will be a budget adjustment for the scope that we have at that. And what we will do is a contingency transfer, a contingency into the line item that we decide to put it in.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, hearing none, if everyone is comfortable reading through the recommendation for motions, and if someone so chooses to make the motion, please say your name first, and then we'll also need a second.
Valerie, do I need to read the whole thing?
Yes, please.
Okay. I move to approve the fiscal year 2020-2021 City of Tualatin budget as amended. The property taxes it contains at the rate of $2.26.65 per thousand of assessed value for operating purposes, and the amount of $2,923,950 for payment of general obligation bond principal and interest.
I'll second that. This is John.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded that we approve the fiscal year 2020 through 2021 City of Tualatin budget as amended. The property taxes it contains at the rate of $2.2665 per thousand of assessed value for operating purposes, and the amount of $2,923,950 for payment of general obligation bond principal and interest. Is there any discussion? All in favor of this motion?
Wait.
Oh, excuse me.
Oh, I just,
Discussion?
well, it's not more like a discussion, more clarification, so someone can help me. This is approved right now with the committee, but then the council will approve it in the coming meetings. Am I correct?
Yeah, so I will take this
We'll
back
adopt it.
to the council, your last meeting in June.
Okay.
The budget will be in front of you to hold a public hearing for adoption of the budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Thank you. Okay, hearing none. All in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. This motion carries. Okay, now Dawn, we move on to the Tualatin Development Commission budget.
Mhm.
And so the same process, we'll need someone with names.
This is Councilor Morrison. I move to approve the fiscal year 2020-2021 Tualatin Development Commission budget.
Monique, and I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilor Morrison and seconded by Monique Weichman to approve the fiscal year 2020 through 2021 Tualatin Development Commission budget. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. This motion carries. Oh, such nice writing.
I worked all day on that.
I believe that.
We thought
It would
Cindy
take me
did
a
it.
lifetime. Oh, golly. Yes. Way too much credit.
Don, what would you have done had we not voted?
We would have had another meeting.
But you wouldn't have been able to show that slide.
Well, you noticed that I waited until afterwards to
He would have made a
Just like,
mandatory
exit,
4-hour
exit.
meeting.
Yeah. But I do want to say thank you to all of you. This is a process that I do look forward to. People think that I'm a little twisted and sick, but it is a process I look forward to every year. We have a great committee. I appreciate all the work you guys do to go through the budget, ask such great questions, and the time you spend looking through it, and then the meetings that you show up. And it's a great example of all my staff and the departments to put together an outstanding budget, and then to all of you that look through the work they do. And I'm proud to sit in front of you and be able to put together the budgets we put together and spend the money prudently that you give us throughout the fiscal year. So a heartfelt thank you to all of you.
And back to you and your staff, Don. I reiterate time and time again how much we appreciate all the back-breaking work that you and your staff do, not just to put this together, but to keep our city moving and working with council and staff and everything, because I think we have a pretty amazing city. So we know it's a lot to do with you and the processes that you put in place, even though you keep moving money from one category to another, but that's good.
I got to keep you on your toes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Because of COVID, well, I mean, what else do we have to do, right?
Yeah. So thank you.
Okay, gosh, you're welcome. So with that, is there anything else, or should we consider a movement for adjournment?
Well, just to re-clarify, the budget adoption by the council will be, the public hearing and the budget adoption will be on the June 22nd city council meeting. If you're interested in tuning in, those are your budget committee members.
And why not, right? Since it's this easy. I love it. Okay, any other comments?
If you're bored, we could all skim back through this and see if there's any numbers not ending in 0s or 5s.
Oh, golly, as tempting as that is, Counselor Pratt, I am sure I need to go wash my hair right now. Yep. And so I won't be getting it cut, not to worry, but I could wash it.
I need to go wash the cat, and I don't have a cat.
Oh my, now that sounds like more fun, not. Okay, so movement, someone want to move to adjourn?
I moved already to adjourn.
You did? I'm sorry, Mayor. I apologize. I missed that.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved by the mayor and seconded by Counselor Pratt to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm not even going to ask any more questions. 7:49, meeting closed. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you in person someday.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Don. Thanks, Council.
Bye.